Okay, so again, welcome to session 2. We'll be talking about formats, layouts, and composition. Um, Usually there's, I start with recap on homework, but I think I'll do that next week as more homework is submitted. So yeah, we'll start with the first consideration, which is what format and size are we working on? Which actually that is one of the questions that I brought up for the brochure project, if you
Okay.
remember. Then we'll be exploring a little bit of layouts and composition, which is very important. And then, I mean, um, questions could be asked at any point, as you know. There's some time at the end devoted to that, and I'll talk about the homework for this week. Cool. So, formats. So as I just mentioned, this the first decision to be made once you're facing or starting a graphic design project. In terms of not the first question or the first decision necessarily when it comes to going through the design process of defining what the piece is, but it's definitely the first question when starting to this like actually working on graphic design, the graphic design aspect of it, meaning that you can start anything if you don't have a format defined or decided for. So these are some questions that you should ask when starting um, to design. And again, I think some of these questions I asked or I shared with you for the brochure project. So
Yep.
first question is this something that will be printed or digital only or both? And this is very important because there are different considerations when it comes to the quality and the production aspects of printed materials versus digital. I'll talk more about that, but basically, when it comes to printed materials, you need everything to be better quality, better resolution. Ideally, work on existing standard formats. Which is the second question: are we using a standard or customized format? So both for printed and digital, there are already existing formats that you may need to use. When it comes to printed, that not only is related to formats and sizes that most people are familiar with, but also for printing purposes. Printers, either your office or your home printer or a big machine in a professional printing facility. They're set up for existing formats. That doesn't mean that you can create or print out materials in other formats. It will require an extra step in production that could be related to cutting the paper that is um, that has established format or making some changes to the printer setups and those sort of things. Um, so that is an important question to ask when it comes to digital. As you know, it doesn't, it's not always necessarily the size, but for sure the format and the proportions. So, for example, Instagram has a square form and like sort of standard for most of the posts, although they also accept now rectangular. There are some places when it comes to customizing your social media presence. So the banner, the profile picture, like all of those aspects have a standardized format. So it's important to know what those are and making the decision or knowing if we are working with the standards or we are creating a different format because of the work or the project that we are working on requires that. Again, so are we using a rectangular format or are we exploring other options? Usually, most standard formats are rectangular. There are some other options in terms of very orthogonal formats, meaning that it's a version of a rectangular or a geometric shape that exists. But you can always create, for example, if you wanted to design sticker or a card with a cutout that is different, that it has like a specific shape, you can create that, but again, that will add considerations and costs in production. You have a question? I can see the chat for some reason. Did you share something in the chat, Sarah?
Yes.
What is it? I can't see the chat. I don't know why. Did you want to ask something?
You know what? I guess I can. When you say standard templates are like rectangular, like meaning you're bound by a rectangular like format. Like, what if you wanted to do? Okay, okay.
But tell
Yeah,
me more. As like, tell me more about your what is in your mind.
no, I'm just wondering. What if you wanted to use? I don't know. Like, I just feel being bound by a rectangular format
I mean, again,
prohibits.
it's not that you can't um, or shouldn't or anything. It's just that you need to know what is the format that you will be using. But it doesn't mean that you don't have like that you have to always work within a rectangular space. Um, so, for example, I was mentioning if you wanted to, I don't know, create a flyer or a card or something that has a shape or a sticker or something, you can totally do that. It will be still when it comes to production purposes, it will be still sort of bound in a rectangular shape to be considered, but then there is an extra component in terms of costs and times because they will have to create the cutout, the die line for the shape that you want to produce. And so what the point here is like those aspects are necessarily to know before starting anything, both because it affects the production aspects or how those pieces will exist, either printed or digital. And also because it determines the space that you will be using. So this can be like these questions should be asked at first and determined at first before starting anything. Of course, that might like change a little bit here and there, but ideally, these are the questions that are for sure determined at first, because then if you need to make decisions or changes, that might affect everything, like the whole design within it. It's also important to know if you are creating a piece that will be resized or reformatted to different different sizes and formats. That is also important to keep in mind at first, because for example, the next question is, if it's a rectangle, are we designing landscape, which is horizontal, or portrait? Because again, the way you design and create the layout and place the elements, like if it before doing it, it feels like it's something easy, or it wouldn't, like if you have something horizontal and you need it vertical, like if it's already designed, people will say, or your client or yourself will think, oh, it's just like changing the format or the orientation. And I mean, it is that, but it's not as easy as it sounds. Like you have to remake a lot of decisions, and everything has to, I mean, it's not just like doing this. Everything changes, the design changes. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's not impossible. It's just like, it's not just hitting a key and everything will be done. There's like, you need to almost redesign everything. Are we using, are we, so if we are working with other people, and we need to make sure that we are all aligned in terms of the units, the measurement units, and resolution. Because if you're expressing your piece in inches and I'm expressing it in centimeters, that will be totally different. So it's important. And also, most people in this training series, since they are American born, we are mostly familiar with the metric system, and here in America that doesn't exist. So that changes the way you design or you think of spaces. And limitations and constraints to keep in mind, like do have to add space for printing areas, for margins, for cutting marks, which is also something that I mentioned for the brochure project, because depending on how it will be printed, you'll have to tell the printer where to cut and where to fold and all of those specifications. Do this make sense?
Yes, yes. Perfect.
That's awesome. So I'll go a bit deeper in these different aspects. So as I mentioned before, again, it's really important to define whether something is printed or digital. Mostly the main reasons being one, that the resolution and size requirements are different. So for printed projects, you need better resolution, better quality, usually bigger sizes. And also there's something very important, which is the color profile. So for print pieces, we are working with CMYK. I don't know if you have ever seen that acronym. I'm going to show you what it means.
Okay.
And we will have a class on color specifically, but I'll tell you more about this in a second. Then for digital pieces, we usually work on RGB. So if you see here on this picture, you can see that this, for example, the letter T has dots. Like all of these are dots. So both for printed and for digital, the principle is sort of the same in terms of how images are created. So images are created by a lot of dots that come together. It's like, I don't know if you are familiar with the
Tattoos. I'm joking.
what?
With like tattoos?
Yeah,
How tattoos do?
that's actually a great example. I
Yeah.
was thinking of the the pointillist artist that in the mid 1800s, there was like this visual art style called point. Well, I might be mispronouncing it. In Spanish, it's puntillismo, but it's basically you created um, the paintings or the artwork point by point, like dot by dot. So basically, you mixed you had like a solid color that and combine let's like for example a blue point next to a yellow point, and when all of those are combined from the distance, it looks like green, you know. So or in, tattoos are also very similar, uh, have a very similar principle. You go like point by point, and it's a combination of points that create sort of the illusion of color and shape. So printing and screens are like that. They if you see here, this is sort of a zoom in to how printing works. So if you, especially for older printing materials and um, um, I don't know, like newspapers and magazines, these dots are more evident. So basically, in printed materials, especially when it comes to big professional work, basically it's a combination of 4 layers, 4 basic colors, which are cyan, which is this one here, yellow, magenta, and black. And those 4 colors combined create millions of colors. This is in print. So basically, you combine those colors and you get any other color. For screens, you'll have it's not a combination of paint or tint or ink. It's a combination of light. So for screens, we have red, blue, and green. Red, green, and blue, actually. Uh, so that's the acronym RGB. So those lights combined create different colors.
That's so interesting. Wow.
Yeah, I'll talk more about that in when we have our color session. But this is to say that I'm gonna change to Illustrator quickly. 1 second. So not all, I mean, I'll mention more design software in a second, but not all of them. I mean, if they are good design software, they should have the ability to change. So if you say here, it says CMYK preview. So that means that you have the option to change the color profile or color mode. So here you see you have CMYK color or RGB. So if we stay in CMYK, you can see that, where's my color here? Do you see the sliders?
Yes.
So each slider is a percentage from 0 to 100 of how much of this color you want to use. So cyan, so let's say 100%. Let's get rid of this. Then magenta, 100%, minus cyan. So we can see the true colors without combining them. Then yellow, and then black. So when it comes to printed materials, you now it's not as common, but it was very common to only work with. I mean, you can decide if you wanted to create a full color piece, meaning that you will use combinations with the 4 tints or the 4 inks, or you only wanted to use 2 of them or 1 of them, or 3 of them.
Now I see why, like when you switch the cartridges, like at work, like I'll switch the cartridges in the main printer. It's only
Exactly.
okay, interesting. Okay, great.
That's exactly. Those cartridges are one is cyan, one is magenta, one is yellow, and one is black. And those create any other color. So if we have this other rectangle and we play around with the sliders here, you can create by just adding things, moving things here around, or you can go and pick from here. But as we will see in our color session, when, for example, you're creating color schemes for or determining branding colors, you need to say this blue, this specific blue is created by 80%, well, 80% of cyan and 60% of magenta. So that is my blue. And then there is a Pantone that might be the same composition, but I'll talk more about that. But the point is that you can decide how much of these 4 inks or tints is present in your color. Then, so this will create something that something to keep in mind is that when you see this on your screen, it won't be exactly the same as the printed version, but it will be very similar. But if you were to create a printed material and you are using the RGB color profile, first it will change. So when you change from CMYK to RGB, it doesn't change much. But if you by mistake work on RGB color mode for printing, Then going back to say CMYK might not be as great. So if we change here to RGB, so here the way the colors are formed or determined is different. So here's a percentage from 0 to 100, but it's a scale from 0 to 255. So if you have 255 of red, it's red, of course, and then this is green, and then this is blue, black is 0 for everything, and white is 255 of everything. Whereas if we go back to CMYK, see the colors change drastically if you go back from RGB to CMYK.
Interesting.
So when everything is 0, is white, and when everything is 100, is true black, which is like 100% of everything. But it should, like, it's not the best practice when you're printing something, because it will waste all of your cartridges, or it will add more ink that you need. So usually you just do 100% of black, and you don't need to add any percentages of anything here. So that is sort of a quick explanation of why it's really important to know whether we're printing or it's just for digital. It's a bit easier again if you're printing and then you want to create. You also have a digital version. I think it's easier going from printed to digital because the change of colors isn't as drastic. But going the other way around is harder. I'll talk more about that specific aspect in the future, but this is something to keep in mind. So let me go back to the presentation. Cool. Okay, so question to ask then. Again, standard versus custom sizes. Long story short, over centuries, especially during the 20th century, formats have been standardized just for like everyone to get on the same page, and also to factories to create similar sizes, and for printers to have similar considerations. So this also comes from formats and proportions that have been used over the history of Homo sapiens. But right now, actually, this is probably slightly distorted, this image, because these are some formats that most people are familiar with, created by international standard conventions. So we have our letter size, A4 and legal. Again, and when it comes to digital work, these have been developed based on the sizes of the devices that we use also determined by social media and in the past, like the first I believe sort of activities or I don't know yeah, uses or industries that started creating standards for digital pieces where like digital advertisement agencies. So most of these actually come from proportions of um, physical materials. So if you see like the four by five, I think it's the same ratio as a letter format. So and then you have a square, and this is close to a legal format. So it's not the same size, but the proportion is very similar. So it's not like the digital formats are completely new and different, although when it comes to some pieces, especially when it comes to um, advertisement, there's like skinny banners or horizontal or vertical or like many other um, formats that are a bit more uh, like different from physical paper formats. Uh, then the recommendation usually is first go with standard formats. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't work with customized formats, but I think those will be explored after getting more familiar with the existing standards. Um, Again, as I mentioned before, when it comes to customized formats, you have to keep in mind that there are extra production or extra cost and like additional considerations to keep in mind. Of course, when it comes to customized, there's like an added value to something that, of course, is out of the common things that you see. But then there are things to keep in mind if you were to produce those materials. Cool. So units of measurement, as I mentioned before, most people out of the US, we are very familiar with the metric system. I personally believe that it makes much more sense that the imperial system. I think it's more precise, but you can. I mean, if we need to work on with what is existing. So this is mostly when it comes to inches, centimeters, feet, like those metric system and imperial system units. We're thinking mostly of printed materials. When it comes to digital materials, we are thinking or working usually with pixels, which is a sort of newest unit introduced to measure things on screens. So pixels are the dots of screens, so are the different squares that when come together produce an image. So let me go back. Actually, I wanted to share how this exists in different software. Oops. 1 second. So going back to Illustrator, so when you open Illustrator, you have some recommendations or suggestions here. Also, you can see the recent work, but when I don't know why I can see, okay, new file. So here you have on top, it actually asks and suggests or like helps you defining what is the format that you will be working on depending on the type of project that you will be working on. So it says mobile, web, print, film and video, art and illustration, and more templates. So if we say we're working for web, there are some formats that exist and are very connected to laptop and desktop screen sizes. If you go to mobile, it brings some of common devices, sizes and formats. Then for print, you have all of these existing formats. So you have letter A4 and other options. And then to the right, you can, as you see, the units change depending on the type of work. So for mobile web, and anything that is screen based, is pixels. For print, it suggests points, but you can change to inches or centimeters or millimeters. You can also change the unit after creating the artwork. So let's see. So let's create a letter sized artwork. So here we have our letter format, and then in this case you can go and change the units. It won't change the size, it just will change the unit that you will be working on. You can see rulers. Where are the rulers? Here. So if you see here, the ruler is expressed in inches. If you you can change in Illustrator, you can go to this corner and hit left click on the corner, and you can change the units. So you can go back to centimeters if you wanted to. So if you zoom in, you can see that here you have 21.59 centimeters. Then there is something like Canva. So let me change the screen to Canva. Canva is sort of a design software, but it's more like a software for non-designers. So it also, like most software, either professional or like lighter version of design software, we'll start with the same question, like what do you want to create? What is the size or the format that you want to create? And this is a bit more, it's not, when we use Illustrator, it shows you formats. In this case, it's mostly like what is the product that you want to create. So let's say you want to create an Instagram post, which is square, and it tells you it's 180 by 1080 pixels. Here, everything is expressed Oh, actually, not the poster because it should be printed, but most things are expressed as in pixels. Flyers, which would be also could be printed, it's also expressed in inches. So Instagram, and there you have your square format. I believe you can change the color profile in Canva, mostly assuming that this is for if you were to print this, probably you will print it in at home or in an office. It wouldn't be like printed professionally. So you can, I mean, if you're printing at home or professional or non-professionally, you can still sort of work with an RGB color mode, even when it's not recommended, but it will still work. If you send something to a professional printer and it's RGB color mode, they will send it back to you. Cool. So back to the presentation.
Can you just say that part again? So if you send a poster to a professional printer using RGB, they'll send it back and require you to use the four color scheme, the CMYK.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, they will send back jobs for many reasons, but that being the most important one. Okay, so dimensions versus resolution. So as you notice, I have mentioned resolution, and probably you have heard that in the past. So meaning something is dimensions. I mean, so when it comes to dimensions, we're talking about the size. When we talk about resolution, it's more the quality of the image or the printed um, um, material. So if you, for example, going back to the home printer or the office printer, you probably have noticed that you can print low quality. And when you see it, it's like the dots are more separated and there's like, it doesn't look clear and it's more like blurry and less defined. It's very similar when it comes to digital images. So either for digital or printed, we express resolution as the dots or points per inch. So the more points or dots, the more quality there is. So we can, this is an example. So since there are more dots and more squares putting together this image, it's more defined and clear and colorful. When there's more, in this case, 72 versus 300, you start seeing bigger squares and less defined images. Does this make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So usually for printed materials, we'll need, and again, professional printers will send back jobs if images or the quality of the work isn't at least 300 dpi, 300 dots per inch. For digital, we can use less quality. We can still use like 72 dots per inch quality, and still it's good quality for digital, not the best, but it's still good. For printed, it's not good at all. Cool. So let's move forward. Then there is also the size versus aspect ratio. Um, Aspect ratio is something to keep in mind, but it's not as, I mean, it's mostly to know what is the proportion of the format that we'll be working with. But usually you don't, when you start working, you don't necessarily say it's a one by one aspect ratio. You can say it's square because it means like both sizes are, I mean, the vertical and the horizontal size are the same. Whereas 3 to 2 or 5 to 4, it means like the horizontal size is 2 units and the vertical size is 3. This is also mostly used for screens, either for digital work or for work that it's used for video or films. That is usually, or motion graphics. That is where the aspect ratio is more used. So
I thought you were going to say for passport size photographs.
that too, yeah. But also like even for photographs, it's mostly like you think more, you express it more in size, like I don't know, 5 by 5 inches, and that means that it's square. Not necessarily the aspect ratio, but that is something to keep in mind.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a screenshot of Illustrator, which I just showed. So again, you can go on top. There's your type of project, preset formats, the dimension, the unit, the orientation, the color mode, and the resolution. Like these aspects, Illustrator asks you to define before or to create the your artwork. In other cases like Canva, like there's things that you can't really customize. It's just preset and you work with what is existing and you sort of trust them. And yeah, this varies depending on the design software. Again, I think Illustrator and Adobe software having, I mean, they're probably the most professional in the market. Then there is Inkscape, which is a free version of Illustrator, not as advanced, but it still works. It has a major flaw, which is that you can't change or select the color mode. And there's
That one
also
called Inkscape.
Inkscape. I'm going to share links to existing software later today for you to explore. We have been using it with the other group because again, it's for free. It's very similar to Illustrator, but it's not quite there, but it's still good.
So Illustrator is what the professionals. So for example, with the arts and illustration, people will do like animations and stuff using this particular software, like what we see on the big screens and stuff.
It depends on. I mean, Illustrator has been mostly used for print materials and branding and digital illustration, of course. Then and also web design, or yeah, like apps and all of that. But mostly, I think it's mostly best for print design. When it comes to individual pieces or one-page pieces like posters or flyers or things like that, because then there's InDesign, which is best for edit like book design, things that have many pages, newspapers, all of um, those materials. Then for motion graphics and animations, well, it depends, because then there's for 3D work, there's another range of options. For I mean, not to for like movie making or anything like that, but like for maybe commercials or things that require some motion graphics. After Effects is used, but there's new software coming up. There's one actually I can show you quickly. Figma, which is very used now for digital work. So anything that is like websites, apps, but actually they also have printed formats. So here you have in a similar way. First, it requires you to define what you will be working for. So is it a font? So it brings the viewport sizes for these devices or a tablet or presentation. So presentations also usually asks or are determined by the aspect ratio, meaning that this is more horizontal, more like this is a bit more closer to a square. Then if you're designing for an Apple Watch, if you're designing on paper, social media. So Figma is actually going after Adobe, but apparently Adobe will be buying it because many people have started using Figma for many things. Is very. It has also a very important component to our to this world that we live in right now, which is collaborative work. So many people can work on the same file and online, whereas Illustrator, Inkscape, well, Canva can do that too, but Illustrator, basically you work on your local version. You can add anyone else to come to work with you. It's like when you have Google Docs,
Right.
and Word, like with Word. Now Microsoft has like a collaborative version, but basically you have traditionally you had your Word file and you work on that, and then if you wanted to share it with someone, you send the file and ask for expect them to add comments or things to your file, and then they send it back. Whereas Google Docs, you can do that in real time. So it's the same with Figma. Like more other people can come here and work at the same time, or add comments, or like it's much more collaborative. Yeah, so we could say, oh, we are working on an iPhone. Yeah. So let me go back to, I'll probably go back to Figma and Illustrator to show you a couple more things. Back to here. So yeah, basically this is to keep in mind that all of these decisions should be made in order to create an artwork. Okay, so keeping that in mind, like you usually might wonder how, like, this is now once you have a format, like how to put things on the format, how to design in a way that makes sense. So it's not like arbitrary or just based on your good eye and I don't know, intuition. It comes from creating a structure, a layout that makes sense and helps you organizing elements on the space that you have created. This is an example of basic layout. So you have this grid composed by 4 columns within a margin that you decide and with separations or gutters that you also decide. And it's 4 columns and 4 rows, and then you can organize your elements based on this structure. The structure isn't seen, meaning that this is something that you can see when you're working on your file. But if you export it for printed purposes or digital purposes, what you see is this. You don't see these lines. But you made them somehow visible or evident by creating these lines and tensions. Then you can create layouts and compose based on different ways to organize or separate or divide your format. One very traditional and almost historic is the golden ratio. There's a lot of information and history behind the golden ratio, but basically it's a proportion that comes from the lines created by this spiral called the Fibonacci spiral. Sorry, which is you can find in nature and in the human body and in many different places, and it's because of that aspect and ubiquitous presence, it creates this sense of harmony and balance that has been used in art, in visual art and architecture for centuries, but also in graphic design is quite used. Actually, I believe the legal format is based on this ratio, on this proportion. So this is the spiral that you can see, and this is again present in many aspects of nature, included out of our Earth. So this is an example of how you could use it. So you have like these guidelines based on the spiral and the lines that are produced. As you can see, there is a perfect square that is defined by this first arc, and then like smaller squares are created all the way as the spiral continues. So you can use this for this is one basic layout or structure that you can play around with when you design. This is another example, a bit off, but still it's very close to the ratio. And if you go online and Google it, in art is present in many pieces from. Actually, there is I think I'm gonna try to find it and share it with everyone. But there's a Disney movie. I think it's like the Donald Duck in like Mathland or something, and they talk about the golden ratio. And it's really amazing to see. These are some examples of it used for branding. And even it's interesting because even like the National Geographic branding and logo is very simple. But since it comes from this principle, it's actually beautiful to see, even when it's just a rectangle. So this is to say that there's many existing structures that you can use to create graphic work. Then in terms of layouts, as the one that I showed at first, grids are also very useful. You can create basically a grid that could be a basic grid of squares, or you can decide on the columns that you want to use and the rows that you want to use on your format. Again, this is something that you want to create and might create using guidelines on, for example, if you're using Illustrator or Inkscape or InDesign. I think Canva is a bit limited in that, and Figma actually has something pretty interesting that I'm going to show you.
Is that what we're going to use for the brochure? Is this grid format, right?
I think so. I definitely think it requires a grid layout to better organize the information. And yeah, as I mentioned, there's different ways to create the grids. So there's a column grid, very useful and extensively used for editorial design and book design, posters, like many things that have mostly text to be digested. It's really useful. Modular grids, so basically using the same module repeated. Also a bit more spontaneous, or I mean, you can really play around with the elements above or based on layout structure. But when it comes to modular grid, there's a little bit of that. It's not as rigid, and then you have hierarchical grid, which is mostly like something that you create. This is more advanced. I definitely suggest starting with columns and modular grids, and then at some point like combining and see how you can create something that it's out of those boundaries. This is an example again of like a combination of column grid and also how this golden ratio can also be included in that, and how with something very simple to create, you can compose things that are harmonious and easy to read. This is an example of like more columns, but again, a grid that helps organizing elements. Another one. And these are some elements. So
I'm just going back real quick to the previous one. I'm just curious.
Yeah, actually, let me show you. This is very similar to what Figma does. So let me show you, especially when it comes again to web design or design for digital materials, but it can be used, of course, also for printed materials. So going back to Figma quickly. Here we have an iPhone screen, and then you have this option, which is the layout grid. So you can use this modular square grid, or you can decide that you actually want to define the columns. And so it says, okay, I want 5 columns or 6, and I can resize the gutter, which is the space between the columns. So I want them to be closer to each other. So let's say it's a 10 pixels column gutter, and then you can say that this doesn't go to the edges of the format. So you can say that, or you can add a margin. So the columns are within a margin, not necessarily going all the way to the edges of the format. So let's say it's a 15 pixels margin on both sides. So you have this, and that way you can start designing, like, okay, I want like an element here, and then like some other things here, blah, 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 and some profile images here. And since this is like an app, I can use extra space. Oh, I don't know. So you can start organizing your elements or designing, and then hide the grid and see how that's coming together. In Illustrator, it's a bit different. Are you seeing the still Figma?
I am. Yeah. This is interesting. So when you created our logo, our HMH logo, what did you use?
What software?
Yeah.
Illustrator.
Okay.
I probably next time I'm going to probably have the original file. I mean, I do have the original file, but probably I don't know if I have it in this computer. So I'll download it, and I think I have like some like a structure that I can share. So here's a bit more. It needs a bit more work on your own in terms of how to create the columns and guidelines. So you can add a grid. Where's the grid? Show grid. Then, but also you can create like some things, some guidelines on your own. So here's a guideline for you to create margins, and then maybe you can say I want to create some columns this size within my margins. I want 6 columns or 5. And you can reorganize this. Why where is it? arrange this align. So distribute vertically, and then you can create some guidelines based on what you have decided. Then I'm gonna hit the grid. 1 second. Hide the grid. So we have like this structure. I want to say that here I want a margin. Guides. Then I want to also define where I know the center of this space is, so I can put a guide here and guide a guide there, and lock the guides. So with these lines again, I can like start using, like start thinking of how to put things in elements to my format. So I can say that I want a text here in this column that goes from half the center of the page to the margin, and another text here next to it, and then like a big headline that goes from margin to margin. So headline, and maybe make it big. So you see, like that way you can start working with the columns and like different aspects that you decide on the structure, but which is basically what I want you to do for homework.